Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Couch GMs podcast on Tuesday, October 12th, 2021. I'm your host, George Kerth, and things may sound a little bit different today, as Cody Roadcap and Snyder could not be with us, but it's okay, because we have one of our favorite guests from the show returning to be with us today. It is Jake Zimmers from the Bang Your Head podcast. And for any of the listeners that weren't listening when you were here back in June, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and the Bang Your Head podcast?
Oh, I was about to go into a deep run about me, but anyway, the Bang Your Head podcast. I was about to go like I'm an anomaly. No, the Bang Your Head podcast. It's a project I've been working on and off for about a year and a half. It is a show where I interview friends, colleagues, people I've met over the course, really, of the end of my collegiate to my professional career since about 2013, 2014, and I get to learn about their stories, what got them through to the point where they are at in their careers today, and at the end of each episode, we end up reviewing their most influential album. Everybody has music or that one album that gets them through particularly maybe difficult or challenging time in their life, and they have music that they go to kind of just use it as a stress reliever and just forget about the outside world. So we end up going in depth, track by track on each album, and it's a great time. It's a great time. I actually just released 2 new episodes over the past couple of weeks. So if you guys want to go check them out wherever you get your podcasts, I sat down with one of my new coworkers at my new gig here in New York, a friend of mine, Erin DePaul. We learned about her collegiate lacrosse career down in Tennessee, what led her up to the Big Apple, and her most influential album from a really, really solid indie rock band out of Phoenix, Arizona called The Technicolors. So if you guys are interested in that, check it out wherever you get your podcasts. Listen to the songs we spotlight. I have some Spotify playlist out there, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. It's a lot of fun.
Definitely, guys, go check it out. It is an inspiring and fun journey every single episode, but I know you guys are here to talk some football, so why don't we jump in right away with some NFL news. And just like last week, NFL news is just dominated by injury news. This is that grind of the season that we all hate. We're all trying to fill injuries on our fantasy teams, but we're going to get through this together. And why don't we start off with the most serious injury news, and then we'll work down from there. So first on the board will be the Pittsburgh Steelers and wide receiver Juju Smith-Schuster, who suffered a dislocated shoulder, and on Sunday night he has decided to get shoulder surgery that will knock him out for the season unless the Steelers make a strong playoff run. He may come back in the playoffs, but that does not help us for our fantasy teams here in the 2021 season.
Wow. So, I was ravaged by the injury bug over the past week and a half, and I do it. I'm in a dynasty league with some friends of mine from college. I love that league just because you get to carry the team over year after year, make your moves on the waiver wire where you can, do the 3-round fantasy or the rookie draft every year, which is a lot of fun. But literally, I'm looking through my team right now. Russell Wilson, who I started, he's out for 6 weeks with an injury. I have Kareem Hunt starting in place of Christian McCaffrey because of his injury. And then the aforementioned Juju Smith-Schuster, who I had starting, and now he joins the injury reserve list on my team called the Team Cheese Jake Factory. I can't even pronounce it. But Russell,
that name's fantastic, though.
Thank you. Russell Wilson out. Juju Smith-Schuster out. Christian McCaffrey out. And right now on my injured reserve, James White and KJ Hamler. It's not a good time to be a member of Team Cheese Jake Factory. In regards to Juju, he's an interesting case to this point in the season. I think not a lot of people were maybe looking at him highly, because I remember going into a bunch of fantasy drafts, people were talking about Deontay Johnson and the running game with Najee Harris, and even the new tight end from Penn State, Pat Freiermuth. But not a lot of people were really saying, keep an eye on Juju, he's the number one, because he's had a down time ever since Antonio Brown left. So this is unfortunate. It's a shame. He had a couple of close touchdowns. I don't believe this past week, but the week before, Ben just missed him on a couple couple of surefire touchdowns. Juju's really talented. And a lot of people don't realize he's still young. Like, he's been in the league for a while. He's only 24. He's going to bounce back from this. I hope he bounces back from this because he's a good player. He's a good receiver, and I hope he can stay healthy and get healthy again and get back on track.
I am definitely very interested to see what happens when we talk about Juju Smith-Schuster in this coming offseason, because we know he's in a contract year. He's probably not going to be going back to Pittsburgh, but he's going to be a fantasy relevant wide receiver somewhere. So I'm interested to see how we're going to talk about him when he comes back after this season. But I think this is also a big step for Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool. I mean, if you listen to me during the offseason, I talk about how 3 I feel like is too much for wide receivers, but 2s are good. You now have a 2 there in Pittsburgh. There's 2 might be some guys you go out and try to buy, because there's going to be targets left by Juju that is now on injured reserve that someone's going to grab, and it's probably going to be them too. But sticking with wide receiver injury news, we also have Quintez Cephas, who has a shoulder issue. He broke his collarbone in their game on Sunday, and that means that he will miss 3 months, having to get surgery, effectively ending his 2021 season. While he wasn't the most fantasy relevant wide receiver, he was the closest that we had in Detroit, and somebody who was a very young star who was on the rise. I don't see anybody really filling that void in Detroit as of now. So really, I guess that just makes Detroit even more of a fantasy wasteland.
Part of me wants to say I feel bad for fans of the Lions, and for about 95 to 97% of Detroit Lions fans, I feel your pain. As George, you and I went through 50 years of struggling as Eagles fans. Unfortunately, it's going to make me sound almost maniacally evil, which I'm not trying to be, but the pain that the Lions fans are going through right now, and I have a buddy of mine. I need to give him a shout out real quick if I can. Joey Herman. When he first started watching football, he didn't go like regional and was like, he's from Southern PA, so he didn't go with like Ravens or Washington or even the Eagles or the Steelers. He went with the Detroit Lions. God bless him. I don't know how or why. We have a group chat, and he always is like, "Oh, the Lions, oh, the Lions." And that's when I mute the group chat. Admittedly, sorry, Joey, but. Like you said, I mean, who's a viable fantasy option? Nobody really. I'll say this, even though the wins and the losses, obviously the Lions have 0 wins, I would say Jared Goff hasn't played terribly. He hasn't been abysmal. He just
has nobody to help.
He's been serviceable, but I did the math the other day on a stat, and in Jared Goff's career, he's 0-12 playing as a starting quarterback with a coach other than Sean McVay, which boggles my mind. And now without any real weapons, I mean, who's there? Like DeAndre Swift in the backfield, fine, I guess.
TJ Hawkinson?
He's probably about it. I was trying to think receiver-wise who's there, but not a lot of names are coming to mind.
No, they have Amon-Ra St. Brown, the rookie, but he's not really done anything too much yet. And then they have Tyrell Williams, who's sitting on their injured reserve, but obviously he's not going to do anything for him sitting on injured reserve. He has to get healthy.
Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe they go tight end heavy. Maybe this means an increase in load for Hawkinson, but then you don't want to make him. It's weird seeing a tight end to me as the number 1 target. Obviously tight ends have exploded in popularity, especially in the fantasy realms over the past decade. I think we could safely say some of the best players in the NFL are tight ends. Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Darren Waller, they're fantastic. But to me, they shouldn't necessarily be number 1 options. They should be an option, but not number 1. And so for the Lions, maybe look at free agency. I don't know what free agent wide receivers are out there. Probably not a lot, and if they are, they're not good. So, you mentioned it. I think you expect to see maybe an increased workload for TJ Hawkinson. If you have him on your team, it could service you well. Other than that, like you mentioned, Detroit, Michigan is a fantasy wasteland.
Well, we can move on to a team that's a little bit less of a fantasy wasteland, and that would have to be the New York Giants. They were absolutely ravaged with injuries in week 5. They lost a lot of key players. We can even just kind of glance over Daniel Jones because he is not really a fantasy relevant star at this point.
He was woozy after that hit. I thought he was like, when he walked away, quick aside, when he was walking away after that hit, I saw his foot just like trip into the turf. And it was kind of like a joke we have out here when like somebody accidentally runs into the door and we're like, who put that door there? And now I'm looking at him walking on the ground like, who put that turf there? But he got he got rocked.
Yeah, it was definitely not a pretty injury. But really, he wasn't even the most serious injury that the Giants sustained on Sunday. They lost Saquon Barkley to an ankle injury. Anyone who drafted him in the first or second round probably already knows, but he did it after the play even. It was just bad luck. He stepped on a guy's foot after he dropped a pass, and his ankle just went sideways. There was some really ugly swelling on the sidelines. He was ruled out pretty quickly. I mean, this really does shake up the Giants' backfield, but the man to own now is Devontae Booker. Devontae Booker's been around the league. He's played with the Broncos for a bit. He's been a starter for a little bit. Somebody who you can probably rely on your fantasy team. It's just the Giants are so ravaged around him that it's going to be tough to see if anybody can put up fantasy points in that offense right now. But if anybody's going to, and we all need running backs, not quite as much as tight ends, but we need running backs, Devontae Booker's a guy you can stash and probably start if you're desperate or trying to replace a Saquon Barkley.
That ankle roll was disgusting. And I feel so bad for Saquon. Not just as a Penn State fan, not just as a fan of football. Like, even though he's on one of my fiercest rivals in the New York Giants, it sucks because, you know, he's a guy, like, while I'm not from that area of Pennsylvania, he's a Whitehall High School product. He's from the Lehigh Valley. And if anybody comes out of that area, you want to see them succeed. You want to see them do well. So to see that happen, and it's just a shame because, you know, a great start his rookie year, but his rookie year was 3 years ago. And unfortunately, ever since then, you know, like, injury prone career, like, it has to be part of the discussion when it comes to him now, unfortunately, which is a shame. And I know Saquon's going to work his butt off. He's an athletic freak. He's a physical marvel. I'm hoping that he comes back from this and can be decent. Because lest we forget, I mean, next year is, I mean, technically this year, but if the Giants decide to pick up his 5th-year option, like, you know, you got to worry about that. But with regards to fantasy, like you mentioned, Devontae Booker, great in the short term, especially from the New York Giants. And then, I mean, scour what you can and see what sort of replacements you can get. Maybe if you're lucky and nobody snagged somebody like Tony Pollard. Like, I think somebody in our drafts got him like late in the draft. But if for some strange reason a guy like Tony Pollard is still out there, try to get somebody like that. Otherwise, running back depth is slim.
No doubt, it is definitely slim, and you're going to be hearing a few other guys who are going to be pulling off the waiver wire that are basically just injury fill-ins at the running back position, because that's what you're going to get this time of year. People that aren't handcuffed that are just going to end up being decent fantasy options because they're getting volume now. But moving on to another position with the Giants, we had wide receiver Kenny Galladay hyperextend his knee. He is expected to miss some time. His similar injury to what a George Kittle suffered last year. If you guys remember that, he missed 2 to 3 weeks. No ligament damage expected, but a potential bone bruise. And as far as wide receivers go in New York, I think we're pretty much down to just Kadarius Toney.
For the most part, yeah. From the Giants, I think that's about it. I mean, there's routes you can go, you know, across some teams here. You know, I'm looking at a guy like Zacchaeus from the Falcons and Nelson Aguilar with the Patriots, Chester Rogers, Van Jefferson, Randall Cobb. There are guys out there, you know, but again, I mean, slim pickings.
But really, though, in all seriousness, Toney looked good this week. He had 13 targets, almost 200 yards. And I mean, with the Giants being so desperate for anyone that can catch a ball, Toney could actually be a very solid fantasy weapon for your team moving forward.
And it's time for Toney to really step up because he hasn't been utilized that much. You know, he's a late first round draft pick. He was supposed to be kind of like, I don't want to say like an underrated receiver coming through the draft, but I mean, you heard the names of, you know, this wide receiver class in this draft was heavy with guys like Devontae Smith and Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, and even towards the back end of the first round, a guy like Rashad Bateman with the Baltimore Ravens. Kadarius Toney was picked for a reason, and I think it's just a shame. It's health. Like, that's what it is with the Giants. It's all about health. Yeah. If that nucleus can stay healthy, like, that offense is underrated. It really, really is. So it's a shame with the injury bug, and I'm hoping that, if Daniel Jones can pull through with his injury, keep the mobility going, involve Toney more in the offense. Otherwise, with Mike Glennon as the backup, I don't see good things happen. Maybe I think maybe relying too much on guys like Ingram or some of the other tight ends on the Giants.
I mean, honestly, as a podcast who's been trying to put together a tight end dartboard, I think we would actually appreciate if Evan Ingram would get more targets and get more involved in the offense, but really the Giants just might not have a choice on whether to do that or not. But sticking with a similar injury going to a different team and the quarterback position, we had Bears quarterback Justin Fields hyperextended his knee, same diagnosis as Galladay, where we're looking at a potential bone bruise, not any ligament damage. He's probably going to miss a few weeks. The Bears are on a bye, so that's a good news. But we have to look at what the options are for the Bears if they are going to miss some time with Justin Fields.
I think the Chicago Bears are currently one of, if not the worst run organizations from an on-field perspective in the NFL. It's I guess Andy Dalton's the starter now.
Yep.
Which I don't know. I'm not a fan of that personally. Like I get Justin Fields is the high draft pick. If he's out injured, then cool. I mean, not cool, but you know what I mean. So Justin Fields is out, then your choice is between Andy Dalton or Nick Foles. And I get Nick Foles is a taboo topic. I get it, but a couple years ago, 4 years ago, lest we forget, Super Bowl MVP, former Pro Bowler. The guy has an arm. Like he's good at his job. He is like if I was Matt Nagy, when Fields comes back, give him the rub. But for the time being, go Nick Foles. But it seems like they're going to go to Dalton. I wouldn't start him. I think unfortunately Andy Dalton's best years are behind him. Good run with Cincinnati, but ever since he left the Bengals a couple of years ago, he just hasn't been good. So I would avoid somebody like Andy Dalton. I really would. It's shame. I like him, Ginger Fury, but it's just not. It's not plausible to start him.
And it's actually just funny that you talk about the Bears are such a poor run organization, and this game was just such a mess, and it kind of exemplified that. But they actually went out and beat the Raiders. The Raiders were a good team going in, and I mean, it's just because they can play defense, and that's the one thing that the Bears can still do, and will always be able to do. It seems like is play defense.
The defense is always good, man. The defense with the Bears is always good. I mean, especially when you have a guy like Khalil Mack, like you're gonna be great. So they can get the
now that they decided not to trade him.
I mean, if they can get the quarterback situation exactly, if they can get the quarterback situation figured out, I mean, the opportunity's there. Like the Packers are sort of struggling, so maybe they can get back in it. But avoid Chicago Bears quarterbacks in your fantasy leagues. There's your Jake Zimmers stamp of approval advice. Just don't start a Bears quarterback.
Unless his name is Justin Fields, then maybe you're thinking about starting him, but I don't even know if I would do that, right after his injury. Maybe you let him sit for a minute. He's not been the most impressive fantasy quarterback so far. But someone who has been an impressive fantasy quarterback so far would have to be Joe Burrow. He's a borderline top 10 guy, someone you might have been starting. But he ended up being rushed to the hospital after the Green Bay Packers and Bengals game that featured about 5 missed field goals and nobody could win as it went into overtime. Burrow apparently took a forearm to the neck, and he suffered a throat contusion that sent him to the hospital. Everything appears to be okay. He's going to be online to play next week, but he played about a quarter and a half of football, never left the game, and then went to the hospital. That's crazy.
I mean, shout out to Burrow. Nobody can question his toughness. From a fantasy perspective, I don't think it's necessarily something to worry about. It seems something minor. And with how, I guess, I don't want to say adamant, but with how high strung, if you want to use that phrase, the NFL has come in recent years with regards to certain injuries, primarily concussions. If this was something that Burrow was able to play through, good on him. I think he will be good to go going forward unless he tore his larynx, which haven't read a report like that. So
would have heard something about that one. Yeah.
exactly. So I think Burrow going forward should still be a solid fantasy option, and look out for the Bengals, man. I mean, a lot of young options on that offense, and Joe Burrow is a part of that.
I definitely agree with that, and that can transition us into the Sunday night game where the Chiefs got absolutely obliterated by the Buffalo Bills and suffered so many injuries along the way. First off being Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the running back. He suffered a knee injury that initially looked like it could have kept him out long term. It's now looking, luckily, to be a shorter term injury, 1 to 3 week kind of timetable. We'll keep you updated on him. We also had Tyreek Hill, who apparently tweaked a knee, but he looks like he's going to be okay to play even next week. When it comes to filling the Clyde Edwards-Helaire hole, you got to pick up Darrell Williams. Darrell Williams has been around and started for the Chiefs before. He's somebody that could jump right into your lineup to replace CEH.
Yeah, speaking briefly about Tyreek Hill, I had a bummer couple of weeks with him. I had him during the Eagles game where he put up an ungodly amount of points, and my team put up 181 points, but I still lost by 3. It was a sad week for me. And then going into this week, obviously he has his injury. I think from a Chiefs perspective, if the Chiefs receiving core, the way I see it, as long as Patrick Mahomes is your quarterback, you're doing fine. I mean, I struggled last night. He still had 2 touchdown passes. But I think like primarily the 3 receivers that would probably get taken in most drafts would probably be Tyreek, Travis Kelce, and I would say probably Mecole Hardman later on in the draft. So if you could snag a veteran, a longtime guy who's been there like Demarcus Robinson, I think that would be solid to go with. He's always been a little underrated on the Chiefs, in my opinion. I think they have a bit of good receiving depth, on that team. So. I mean, a guy like Demarcus Robinson and even Byron Pringle, who was returning the kicks last night, getting in there as well. So I think there's a couple of options from the Chiefs that you can go off of on the Tyreek Hill front. And with regards to Edwards-Helaire, you mentioned Darrell Williams seems to be about it on that front from a running back perspective from the Chiefs. A solid option, but it makes me miss the days where they had the other Williams on that team, Damian Williams, as the starting running back. If Clyde would have been out and Damian Williams would have been there, that would have been a solid backup choice.
Hey, at least we're seeing Damian Williams being relevant for us right now on the Bears while David Montgomery is sitting out.
Exactly. So Darrell Williams stepping in, good short-term option, obviously, depending on how long Clyde Edwards-Helaire is out, and hopefully he can get back safe and healthy soon.
Yes, but hey, don't discount the Mecole Hardman thing yet. Go ahead and check your free agency to see if he's out there. I thought he was owned a lot more. I think he's owned in a lot of leagues that we're in. I think you own him actually in our league of record, but he is somebody who's actually only owned in 26% of leagues. So if Tyreek Hill does miss some time, I think the first option's got to be Mecole Hardman. He's somebody that can immediately jump into your lineup and start if Tyreek Hill misses time, even though he's not expected to.
And I think part of why you maybe don't see him in as many leagues as you probably should is because he's seen mainly on the special team side of things. But then again, who started off like that was a guy named Tyreek Hill. So I mean, maybe pay a little more attention to a guy like Mecole Hardman to step up in Tyreek's absence.
And with that, we will mercifully end our injury update news report, and we can move into my favorite segment, which isn't a little disappointing. I have to intro it myself this week, but let's get to quotes of the week. Now, I only have one quote for us this week, but it's going to come with a little bit of a story like our quotes of the week last week. But this one's going to look at someone we talked about earlier in the show, Kadarius Toney. So a little background story. Toney was well on his way to having a great day. 13 targets, 180-something yards. But the Giants are down big against the Cowboys, and a brawl breaks out, and Toney just punches a guy with a helmet on. Like, I don't understand why players find the need to get angry and then just punch somebody that has a helmet on. Like, all you're going to do is hurt yourself. But anyway, Toney got ejected for that. He ended up also getting an X-ray on his leg at some point in that game. It was such a roller coaster game for Kadarius Toney. But after the game, head coach Joe Judge, talking about Kadarius Toney and his actions and his ejection, said, "Look, There's a pretty distinct line in terms of competing and doing the things we're not going to condone as a team that put us behind. That's not going to be accepted. That's not going to be condoned. That's as far as I'm going to go with it. Obviously, it resulted in him leaving the game, and I'm just going to leave it at that right now. So I know we talked about Kadarius Toney as pretty much the only wide receiving option the Giants have left. He's somebody you should definitely add on the waiver wire. But that just gives me a slight little bit of concern that Toney's going to end up being a guy that could be in Joe Judge's doghouse.
I think if it wasn't for the rash of injuries, Kadarius Toney would have been suspended for at least 2 or 3 games by the Giants. But with everybody and their mother seeming to either roll their ankle or hurt their knee or get a concussion, like they need somebody. Otherwise, they're trying to sign somebody who just played a few years ago in the Arena Football League. So
Pretty much,
it's don't be stupid. Don't like you said, man, you're never going to win a battle if it's fist to helmet. That's never going to go well for you. I'm surprised he didn't break a bone in his hand or sprain his hand or break a knuckle or whatever. It's like, don't be stupid, because karma's going to come back and bite you. So,
or break your hand or something along that line.
Exactly. So, hopefully Toney can get back in the right headspace. He's going to seem to be the number one option, as we talked about earlier. So we'll see what happens.
We definitely will. And why don't we just leave it there at that and move on to a little bit of bonus Week 5 waiver wire. And why don't we jump into a couple of extra Week 5 waiver wire pickups. I know we talked about a lot of guys that you'll see over on my article at thecouchgms.com already, but we'll cover a couple of extra that we haven't talked about, and we even got a bonus player that Jake wants to highlight. So we can start off with the running back position. A running back who's not even necessarily filling in for an injury, which is shocking, I guess, at this time of year, but it's Ramondre Stevenson, running back for the New England Patriots. He is only 0.6% owned, and he had 11 carries last week. So we might see a little bit of a new running back pecking order in New England, but Bellatrix has fooled us before and probably will fool us again. What are your thoughts on Stevenson really quick and that backfield?
The Patriots need to find that second running back in the backfield. James White, one of their leaders, is obviously out for the season with a hip injury. He's on IR. So, Damian Harris with his fumbling issues, you need somebody to step up, and Stevenson might be that guy. So it's going to be interesting to see if he simply fills in as that RB2 with James White out, or if he can take the reins from Damian Harris and make that position his own. But like you mentioned, Belichick's always coy, so you're never really going to know until it happens.
Yeah, I mean, he's somebody I wouldn't start right away because you never know what's going to happen with Belichick, but he's our best hope, I want to say, because we're really not seeing a whole lot out of Damian Harris, and there's some fumbling issues going on, which always puts people in the doghouse. So we'll see what happens with that backfield moving forward. Going to wide receivers, there's someone special that you wanted to mention here, Jake, so why don't you jump in on your wide receiver ad?
The guy I want to mention is somebody that I'm surprised I didn't mention him back in June when I was on the show and we talked about fantasy drummers, like underrated players. T.Y. Hilton from the Indianapolis Colts. He had a run from, I want to say 2014 to 2017 or 2015 to 2018, but he had a 4-year run where he made Pro Bowl after Pro Bowl, 4 straight Pro Bowls, and he was Andrew Luck's number 1 target and had a great, marking himself as a top receiver in an organization that has had some of the best receivers of all time, particularly Marvin Harrison and Reggie Wayne. So, seeing him stand out like that was really cool. The past couple of years, in the absence of Andrew Luck, this is literally his 4th different quarterback in 4 years, I believe, between Luck, Jacoby Brissett, Phillip Rivers, and now Carson Wentz. So with him coming back and being healthy, fingers crossed that he can get back on the right track and be, it's hard to put him in the top 10 discussion because there are so many good receivers. But the top 15, 20 receivers currently in the NFL, that's not a bad position to be in with so many good receivers in the league.
No, true. It's definitely not. We know Carson Wentz likes to gunsling too. We talked a little bit about him looking sketchy coming back from his injuries, but if he keeps getting more comfortable, Obviously, we record this before Monday Night Football, so we would not see how he looked against the Ravens. He looked a little bit better in week 4, but it could be somebody that if he feels comfortable be able to stand in there and throw a ball downfield, that's T.Y. Hilton's bread and butter. So he could be somebody that actually does give you a good boost in fantasy, especially when he plays Houston. But that was something we mentioned at the beginning of the year. He just likes to shred the Houston Texans. Then we always have to talk about tight ends on the show because everyone is struggling for tight ends. And we have an old favorite that had a breakout game this week. Good old Hunter Henry, now of the New England Patriots, now has 2 games of 10 plus fantasy points. And even though they still have Jonnu Smith there, it looks like he's somebody who could be starting to become a tight end that we can rely on again. He's getting a couple of red zone targets, which I think was the biggest problem. We weren't sure between Jonnu and Hunter Henry which one was going to get the red zone targets. Turns out it might be both because their wide receiver core is not necessarily one that would score red zone touchdowns, and their running backs are a mess right now. So if Mac Jones continues to improve as a quarterback, I like Hunter Henry's outlook in the tight end position for the rest of the season.
Yeah, the tight ends with the Patriots are going to be tricky. In the past, I think Belichick has liked having those 2 tight end systems. And now you have a guy like, you have Jonnu Smith and you have Hunter Henry, who Jonnu Smith. I'm delighted to report is not on the Titans, as I assumed the last time he is on the Patriots. And I picked him up as my backup tight end, who I now have to start in one of my leagues after the injury to Logan Thomas. So, selfishly, I want to see the targets go a little more in the direction of Jonnu. I thought he was a solid tight end in Tennessee, and I thought he could bring that to the Patriots. But with them still, with a rookie quarterback and everything else going on with that team, it's hard to say really, which weapon is going to step up. So fingers crossed that one of the tight ends step up as a good security blanket in the red zone. But selfishly, give the ball to Jonnu.
It makes honestly both of them, but more or less Hunter Henry no more of a dart throw than any of the other tight ends we have out there outside the top like 5. But we talked a little bit about Dan Arnold in the past few weeks, and now that he's a little bit more established in the Jacksonville playbook, dude saw 8 targets last week in week 5. And if that's going to continue, he's another tight end that could definitely be added to the dartboard. They traded for him thinking that he would be a part of that offense. Excuse me. And there's a lot of mediocre weapons in that offense. Rookie quarterbacks like the tight end. Dan Arnold could end up being somebody to help you out.
Man, now, excuse me, now if only the Jaguars would have kept a tight end that they had on their roster who was familiar with the offense. I'm kidding. This isn't a Tebow thing. Anyway, Dan Arnold, I've always respected from afar. So it'd be interesting to see if he picks it up in Jacksonville. Jacksonville's not good. So maybe Trevor Lawrence can find his tight end a little more because unlike the Tennessee Titans, the Jaguars can't run the ball every play and expect fantastic results. So passing game needs to open up a little bit, especially with the injuries on the receiving front for Jacksonville. So maybe Dan Arnold is that choice. I'm not saying he's going to be top 5 tight end. He's not. Mm-hmm. He's just not. But he can be serviceable.
Exactly. And they're also down. They have targets in the open since DJ Chark was hurt 2 weeks ago. So they're looking for a place to go. Dan Arnold is a willing body, at least I hope, for the tight end stock market out there. But we have one more segment here before we go. We got to talk some Thursday Night Football. Let's get our Thursday night preview. And Jake, I think it's going to be one that we're tuned into a little bit extra as our Philadelphia Eagles are hosting Tom Brady and the defending Super Bowl champion Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They may be a little over their head, but we're talking fantasy for this one. Tampa Bay has got a tough defense, and I think we could start on the Philly side and figure out, are there any of the normal fantasy starters for Philadelphia that you would decide to fade this week or stay away from like a Jalen Hurts, the running backs, a Devontae Smith? Or are you avoiding them because of the tough defense matchup?
I would stay away from Miles Sanders personally. The Bucks run defense is great. I mean, not that Sirianni likes to run the ball anyway, but that's another conversation for another time. I think you keep with Jalen because, despite maybe some of his mental blunders in recent weeks, the guy did just come back and put together a great comeback against the Panthers to win that game down in Charlotte. I think he's going to continue to grow if he just keeps his head on and stays smart. That was one of the things that as Eagles fans we knocked Carson Wentz for in the past, was trying to play hero ball and trying to do too much with the ball, and fumbles and interceptions would happen all the time. So I think if Jalen Hurts stays smart with the ball, the relationship has gone very well in the first 5 weeks between him and Devontae Smith. I think Devontae has been everything advertised and then some, especially with his route running and just everything he brings to the table. So when it comes to who you start on the Eagle side of the ball, I think you keep it with Jalen. You could risk it and have Devontae Smith as either your wide receiver 2 or flex. Miles Sanders is kind of a pick 'em. In my opinion, I have him in my dynasty league. I have to start him because he's honestly one of my healthy running backs.
I feel that, actually. I have the same situation.
Yeah, so with him, it'll be tricky. And I actually have him in our league too, in our NFL.com league. So I think I might have to question, whether or not I start him this week, take a look at who I have on my bench and who's on the waiver wire to really see what I can do, because, Sirianni doesn't give him enough touches, and that combined with the Buccaneers defense, it's tricky. So see what happens. Like I said, avoid Sanders in my opinion. I would roll with Hurts and Smith, maybe risk it with Dallas Goedert if you're feeling risky, but that's again more of a pick'em scenario.
Agreed there. And it's sad. I almost feel more confident with Gainwell than I do Sanders right now, especially in this matchup, because I feel like they could be playing from behind. Gainwell's been getting more passing targets. Could be somebody that, if you're desperate, could be a flex, but I think it's in the same situation as Sanders. Don't love the play. Could play if you need to. Moving to the Tampa Bay side, don't think there's anything shocking there. I'm always on the fence with Antonio Brown, because I think the top 2 receivers are the 2 locks, and you got Antonio Brown kind of on the fence. I'm not convinced that Philly's defense is going to pull out another game like last week against a high-powered offense, so he could be a big play. And there's news that says Gronk may play, may not. If Gronk does not play, you're probably looking at Cameron Braid again. If Gronk does play, he's in your lineup because he's been playing so well that you have to play a tight end that's playing well.
When you look at who to start from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, it starts with Brady. He's going to be a consistent fantasy starter because he's Tom Brady. Like, there's kind of enough said about that, right? Like you can't go wrong with the guy. He set history again last week for the first time in his career in the same game, throwing for over 400 yards and 5 or more touchdown passes in the same game. He's still making history at 44 years old in his 22nd season. Start him. Just don't be an idiot. If you have him, you start him. When it comes to the skill position players, running back is iffy because one week you're going to have Ronald Jones do really well. The next week it'll be Fournette. That's more of,
Plus,
who did
Philly's
well.
run D is usually actually pretty good.
Yeah, and you got to look at who did well last week versus it's kind of literally almost like an alternating week. So make that call where you can from a receiver and tight end perspective. I mean, if Gronk is healthy, he'll be a red zone threat like he always is. Chris Godwin is always a steady hand at wide receiver. The one who's always a pick 'em for me is Mike Evans, which is weird because I picked him and I was surprised where I picked him in our league, and I have him starting in the flex because of who I have. I have guys like DeAndre Hopkins in my wide receiver pool right now. So when I was reshuffling my lineup and optimizing everything, Mike Evans got put in the flex. I said, that's what he should be better than that. And it's not that he's bad. The dude's great. Like first 7 years, 1,000 yards receiving at least in each of his first 7 seasons.
I believe he's the only receiver to do it.
Yeah, I think that's something that nobody talks about because everybody talks about the flashy receivers. Mike Evans, I think the tricky thing with the Eagles is always their secondary. And look, they played really well against the Panthers. Slay had 2 picks. Steven Nelson had a pick. Maybe they use that confidence and play better. But Brady gets the ball out so quickly and still has such a pretty deep ball. It wouldn't surprise me to see Mike Evans put up some points. And like what you mentioned about AB, again, another risky proposition. I think last year it was slow out of the gate because he only played half the season and then he got into a rhythm. I think if he has his head on straight, and that's a big if, I think he is a top receiver. Like, the guy's still in his prime. Like, he's still really good. So it might be worth the risk against that secondary with his speed and with his athleticism. It's AB, man. It's AB.
I think the one thing I want to say before we wrap up, then, there's a lesson to be said. I know you said you have Mike Evans in your flex when you kind of shake things out. If you have a player playing on Thursday, move him up to a wide receiver spot. Keep that flex open with somebody else just in case disaster happens. It gives you more lineup flexibility going into the weekend. Cody reminds you every week. I felt like I had to as well because he's not here today. But yeah.
Cody also says about not drafting a kicker and not having kickers on your team. But that's actually the first piece of advice I've ever heard Cody give that I... You're great, Cody.
We definitely need to have you back soon on an episode with Cody here as well, because I feel like you guys could just jaw back and forth. I'll just sit back and mediate. We can just have a whole episode of you, Cody, just going at it.
It would literally be an hour of him just saying, accept my trade. And I would say no. And he would say, okay. And then 5 minutes later, accept my trade. Okay.
You're not wrong. That was, I feel like, our entire college career was walking into a classroom with Jake and Cody yells, accept my trade.
He literally did that after our draft. He sent me a trade so he could try to get Aaron Rodgers. And I just, no, because it's Aaron Rodgers. I need him.
And the other thing is, don't play with your heart, except unless you're Cody and you draft or get Aaron Rodgers every single year.
Let's be real. If he wanted to, he would draft a fantasy team full of Packers. Right? Like,
yes, but that is not how you win fantasy football. So he actually avoids it. I am impressed, honestly, but no, not really.
Same.
He's a smart player. He just has his couple of tendencies, like I'm sure we all do.
Absolutely.
But anyway, thank you all for listening to today's episode of the Couch GMs podcast. This is where Tyler would normally remind you to get involved. So remember, it is way more fun for us and more fun for you when you get involved. Find us on social media and on thecouchgms.com. Jake, I thank you one more time for joining us today. Feel free to give a little plug. Tell us where you can find the Bang Your Head podcast one more time before we go.
Bang Your Head podcast you can find wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Google, Spotify, and I actually just got an email that you can add podcast playlists to Facebook. So keep an eye out for the Bang Your Head podcast Facebook page. The feed will be on there eventually. And if you want to listen to the songs that we review or spotlight, check out the playlist on Spotify. And you can listen to the songs that my guests and I blab about every episode. To mention at the beginning, 2 recent episodes with Aaron DePaul that are out now. Music from Observe the 93rd and Crooked Ways in both episodes too. 2.5 hours combined of great content there. So check it out if you want to hear some tasty jams and conversations.
I love it, Jake. I will be going to check that out as soon as we're done recording here. Everyone else should as well. And because you mentioned Facebook, the Couch GMs is also available on Facebook as well. Good job to mention it there by me. I'm dropping the ball here. It happened last week. But again, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Couch GMs podcast. Be sure to check us out later in the week when we preview week 6, every single game. Check out our website. And for Jake Zimmers, I'm George Kerth, and we'll see you later in the week.